What's it like to have curly hair? It's putting on a wig because you don't have time to comb it, because if you comb it dry, then your hair will be all frizzy, and if you comb it wet, then you have to wait for your hair to dry, and you don't really have time for that because you have to work in a few hours, and so you gotta film this as quickly as you can. Wait, this video was about asexuality, wasn't it? Yay, happy Asexuality Awareness Week! It's a weird thing to call this week because awareness suggests like there's an issue with being asexual, like cancer awareness or something like that. But then again, in its strictest definition, people do need to be aware of asexuality. We do exist, but there's a lot of misinformation and just not understanding about who we are and what we are. This video isn't going to be fully comprehensive about everything about asexuality. There's a lot that goes into it. I'm gonna link in the wherever the description is nowadays for resources for that kind of stuff. But one thing I can do, and I know a little bit about being an asexual myself, is what is asexuality? In its strictest definition, asexuality is not experiencing sexual attraction or the desire to act sexually based on other attractions. Other attractions being like romantic attraction, like wanting a romantic relationship with someone, or aesthetic attraction, like you like that person's aesthetic, how they're dressed, how they look. I actually get that a lot. I'll become flustered to talk to someone because I think they're just so aesthetic. Asexuality is a spectrum. There's different experiences of it. Like there's demisexuality where a person can experience sexual attraction for another person, but they already need to have had an emotional connection to them. Like an emotional bond, and then suddenly they just wake up one day and it's like, huh, I find you hot. Or at least that's my understanding of it. If I'm wrong, please correct me on it. Like with a lot of things, there's a lot of ways to be asexual. And also, like with a lot of other things, there's a lot of misconceptions about what asexuality is. Asexuality is not celibacy. Celibacy is a choice not to have sex. Asexuality is something that we're born with and is a part of us. Yes, sexuality can be fluid, but it's not something that we decide to be, just like someone can't decide to be gay. We're not incels. We're not this way because someone decided not to give us the sex. That also implies that we chose to act this way because of some denial of something. We're also not anti-sex. Some of us are sex repulsed and don't want to have sex at all. But that doesn't mean we want everyone to keep their hands off each other. Some of us just want people to keep their hands off of us. And we also don't want to have sex thrown in our face all the time. Like a sexual person might be really into this one gratuitous sex scene in a movie, but for an asexual, it's like, why is that there? I'm not getting anything out of it. And it's not to say that media needs to cater to us in particular, but it's a sort of silent denial that there can be anyone who doesn't want to watch two characters randomly get it on. This next misconception might be a little surprising, but this has been honestly said to me. Asexuals, we are not plants. For one, plants don't reproduce asexually. They need their seeds fertilized too. And second, asexuality isn't saying that we can reproduce on our own. English words often have multiple meanings, and by saying that asexuals are calling themselves plants is showing a vast misunderstanding of language. But I can understand why these misconceptions come about. Asexual seems to mean not having sex, which, while it is true for a decent number of asexuals, just isn't the case. A good number of us like sex. We like the feeling of being physically intimate with someone, even if we don't find them attractive in that way. We can like our buttons to be pushed, especially when it's with that special sun pony. And yes, that does mean that some of us do masturbate. Something that I see a lot is the question of how do we choose our partners then if we don't feel sexual attraction? Well, as I kind of alluded to before, it relies on romantic attraction, aesthetic attraction, but most importantly, more on an emotional bond. This isn't to say that none of these come to play in allosexual relationships, allosexual being the basically opposite of asexuality, meaning that you do feel sexual attraction, but for us, we rely on them more because sexual attraction just isn't there. And I want to make clear, not feeling sexual attraction for someone doesn't mean that we'll jump into bed with just about anyone. Again, there's other criteria to be filled before becoming physically intimate with someone, and that's a really harmful assumption. Don't assume that about anyone. That's like the stereotype that apparently all girls who wear black underwear are DTF. It's just as silly. But what about the asexuals who don't want sex? Well, as I said, there's quite a lot of them, and that can make things rather complicated. A lot of asexuals try to seek out other asexuals because it's easier to explain and express why they're not in the mood, and part of the idea is to try to find someone who also doesn't want to be intimate that way. Now, there are some asexuals who are more meta-sex. They don't really want it, but they don't really hate it, but they'll still do it with their partner anyway because they want to be intimate with them, and that's okay. Now, the key distinction here between rape and what I'm describing is both parties are consenting. they're okay with it. Neither of them are feeling pressured in any way to do something they don't want to do. And that's important in any relationship, making sure that you're stopping when your partner doesn't want to, and making sure to tell your partner, I don't want to do this. And understanding that if your partner says, no, I want to do this, so you're gonna do this, it's really unhealthy and you really should get out of that. It's rare, but I've seen some asexuals who aren't looking for sex or any sort of sexual interactions criticized for how they dress. Basically, dressing too sexy, which of course is dumb. That suggests that the way a person dresses or looks can only be for someone else, that it's only meant to attract a partner. One, that's a very messed up way to look at someone else's and your own body, and two, that's just not how things work. That goes along with the idea of if a girl dresses in a seemingly promiscuous way that they want sex or something. People sometimes, and actually most of the time, dress in the way that they do because they like it. That's what makes them feel good, and they like looking good in their own eyes. Hell, I like looking at myself in the mirror and saying, hey, y'all look good today. Like, I put this wig on for the first time today, and seeing myself in the mirror, it was nice to be like, huh, I don't look like trash. Asexuals, just like everyone else, can dress as promiscuous or as modest as they want because it's what they want. I personally am very modestly dressed most of the time, just because I'm comfortable with it. And that's also not to say that asexuals who are modestly dressed hate their body or their sexuality. Again, it's just what we like and are comfortable wearing. Shouldn't the goal always be to be comfortable in our own skins? Especially today with the topic of asexuality, there's a big debate on whether or not we're oppressed and whether or not we are inherently LGBT+. No, we don't face systematic oppression in quite the way that gay people and trans people do. But we do face erasure like bi and pan folk. It's the exact same thing as a bi or pan person dating someone who is heterosexual and therefore being called not LGBT or not queer. Asexuals are also at risk of corrective rape, which pretty much everyone else in the LGBT community are. I've had plenty of people tell me that I just haven't had the right dick, and therefore my asexuality just is temporary or something. That isn't to say that every asexual has experienced this corrective rape, but neither has every gay, bi, trans, etc. person. We also face invalidation. There's a ton of people, especially on Tumblr, saying that asexuals aren't special because we are basically straight, that just not wanting sex isn't enough to be LGBT+, or that it makes us not a real sexuality. Like with being gay or trans, that shows a very similar invalidation based on misinformation, and it's willful ignorance because those kind of people don't want to be informed. They don't want to look up what actually is asexuality and what makes us LGBT+. Another way that people invalidate asexuality is by saying that aphobia doesn't exist, namely because no one's afraid of asexuals. Well, that argument doesn't make sense either. If you can use that to explain away aphobia, then what do you have to say about homophobia? Homophobes aren't afraid of gay people, and yet that's the term you guys use so freely. You use it against us to say that we don't experience anything like it. I personally don't like the terms aphobia or homophobia because, as I just said, they imply a fear of something, but in order to be best understood, I need to use those terms. In the current language, those are the best ways for me to convey what's going on. And this isn't the oppression Olympics. This isn't about who is feeling the most suffering or oppression. This isn't about, oh, this person over there is hurting more because of society, so therefore they're more valid than I am. It's the African orphan fallacy. It's the same fallacy that in reverse says that you can't be happy because there are happier people in the world. And the LGBT community isn't about the oppression that you faced. If it were, then a decent amount of the people in the LGBT community wouldn't belong there because whether they be bi, gay, trans, wouldn't belong there because they didn't personally face oppression. LGBT+ also isn't just about same-sex attraction or not being cisgender. Those two requirements aren't necessarily causal and have only been grouped together after the fact, after the community was established. All LGBT+ means is not default, i.e. being heterosexual and cisgendered. And no, even heteromantic asexuals are not straight. There's still that asterisk that makes them not entirely straight because they are not heterosexual. They're asexual. And all the needs and goals of these groups that exclusionists are trying to keep out of the LGBT community are similar, if not the same. Progress for one tends to mean progress for all. Why shouldn't we work together for the common good and to bring about the changes in society that we need? The changes in society that sees us as an other, as something you need to come out as, otherwise people will think you're heterosexual cis. So basically for this entire video, I've been talking about asexuality in a broad sense. But what does it mean for me? Well, I am a biromantic asexual. That means I don't experience sexual attraction for anyone, but I can experience romantic attraction for boys and girls. I'm open to dating both. With sex, it's a little more complicated. Might be a bit TMI, but if it helps someone to feel like they're not alone, let's go for it. I personally don't care for sex. It feels nice, but I don't particularly want it most of the time. It rarely ever comes up, and it actually needs to be brought to my attention for me to think about it. And yes, I have had sex in the past. That is another misconception that I forgot to mention. People will say, oh, you're only asexual because you haven't had sex. Well, I've had it, and I can tell you, it's okay. For me at least. It's interesting to be able to identify myself as asexual because I thought I was straight for the longest time, and so do a lot of other asexuals. But you're biromantic! How could you have thought that you were straight if you are now bi? Well, this is how. In high school, I dated a girl, but found I never really wanted to have sex with her. I was fine with making out and kissing, I actually enjoyed that part, but because I wasn't into sex, I thought, well, maybe I'm just not into girls. But then when I got with a guy, I found, oh, so my experience is the same here. Maybe I'm just weird and I don't care about sex? Actually, for most of my life, I thought I was just really mature. And that's what other people told me too. I never got turned on by another person's body, and I didn't really talk about sex a lot, so people just thought I'd skip the horny teenage phase. And that's what I thought too. That's what I thought when I saw all those sexual ads that are supposed to make you want to buy their product because of the sex appeal. And fun fact, a lot of asexuals for most of their lives didn't actually know that those ads work. They were under the impression of, no one actually thinks that this beer will get you all those hot girls. Or what society perceives as hot, because again, we don't know what's sexually attractive because we don't experience it. It's actually personally really nice to know or have an idea of what I am. Belonging is a problem that I've had for a long time. I made a video about it in my early days of YouTube that I'm going to remake at some point. But for pretty much everything I do, I feel like an imposter. That I don't belong. And not experiencing sex in a way that I saw other people, that made me feel like an outsider too. But now here I am, and I know that there are other people who are like me in the world. Other people who can look at an objectively beautiful body and not get turned on. That's part of why I wear my ace ring. It's a sort of reminder to me that I belong somewhere, and a hint to other asexuals that, hey, you're not the only one. Fun fact, this ace ring actually doesn't fit me. I guess there was a lot of moisture in the air or something that made my finger all puffy when I bought this, but yeah, I'm gonna need to get a new one soon. And while I'm glad to know that I'm asexual and that there's a label out there that I feel actually works for me and I'm not an imposter with it, asexuality doesn't define me. That's not all of who I am. It's a part of what I am, just like a gay person isn't just gay. And while I do spend a bit of time here and there talking about asexuality, it's not as big part of my life. Mainly, I do it because representation is needed for asexuals. There's so much space for misinformation or just not information at all. There's so much explaining to be done when you say, hey, I'm asexual. And I want to get to a future where we don't need to do that as soon as possible. I want to be past all this exclusion and misunderstanding of what asexuality is. And the best way I know how to do that is to make videos like this. So yeah, happy Asexuality Awareness Week from me, NotAVampyre, and Cube here. Thank you very much for consuming this video. If you want to talk to me about just about anything, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. You can find me on NotAVampyre. Thank you very much again, and until next time. And LGBT I can't say LGBT plus.